Before we begin, you need to understand one thing. The woman in this story did not leave because she was brave. She left because she finally understood what staying had already cost her. And the man who followed her out that door was not a good man by any definition the world would accept. But he was the only one in that room, out of 60 people who saw her. Really saw her. And he had been seeing her since the moment she walked in. Her name was Elara Donovan. This is what happened on the night she stopped disappearing. Her name was Elara Donovan, and she was 29 years old, and she had spent most of those years becoming an expert at being invisible. Not the accidental kind of invisible, the deliberate kind. The kind you learn when you are small, and you figure out that the easiest way to keep peace in a house is to take up as little space as possible, to want as little as possible, to fold yourself into whatever shape the people around you require, and to do it so smoothly that nobody ever notices you are bending. She grew up in a house in New Jersey where her father came home already emptied out from work, and her mother filled every silence with cooking and cleaning and the specific kind of busyness that stops you from having to feel anything. Nobody fought. Nobody left. Nobody was really there either. The house was quiet in all the wrong ways, and Elara learned in that quiet, the way children learn the rules of rooms before they learn the rules of language, that love meant making yourself convenient. She was 26 when she met Nathan Holloway at a rooftop party in Midtown Manhattan. He was tall and polished, and he laughed at everything she said like she was fascinating, and he called the next day and showed up with flowers on the third date, and she thought, this is what it feels like to be chosen. And she had been waiting to feel chosen her entire life. 3 years later, on an ordinary Thursday, he slid a ring across a restaurant table without standing up and said, I think we should make this official. She said yes before he finished the sentence. She told herself steadiness was the same as love. She told herself that a man who was reliable was worth more than a man who was spectacular. Tonight was their rehearsal dinner. Tomorrow was the wedding. Her dress was in a garment bag at his apartment on Park Avenue. Her grandmother's pearl earrings were in her ears, the ones she wore every time she needed to feel like herself. She arrived at the River Cafe in Brooklyn 30 minutes early and adjusted the centerpieces herself because the staff had placed the gardenias too close to the candles, and she noticed. She always noticed, and she wanted this night to be the beginning of something she could finally believe in. She was at the bar when the bartender said, Already handled, miss. The gentleman at the end ordered it for you. She looked up, and across the polished mahogany of that bar, a man she had never spoken to was watching her with the kind of steady, unhurried attention that made everything else in the room go slightly dim. He was not what she expected from Nathan's world. He was older, lean and still in a way that suggested he had long ago trained the unnecessary out of himself. Dark suit, no tie, one collar button open. He held his glass like a man who was used to waiting in expensive rooms without needing to fill the silence. She looked away. She felt him still watching. She told herself it meant nothing. She picked up her club soda and walked back toward the room where 60 people were waiting for her to perform the role of the happy bride. She was very good at performing. She had been practicing her entire life. Nathan arrived 22 minutes late and kissed her cheek without looking at her face and immediately turned to work the room. She followed at a small distance the way she always did, filling his silences, laughing at the right moments, making sure his glass was never empty. Nathan's mother, Diane, was already seated at the head table. Diane was the kind of woman who deployed elegance as a weapon and had never once said anything directly cruel to Elara, but had a gift for the remark that leaves a bruise without leaving a mark. She looked Elara up and down and said, "You look tired, darling. Are you sleeping?" Elara said. I am wonderful, Diane. Thank you so much for asking. And Diane smiled the way a person smiles when they have already decided how a story ends. The dinner began. Elara ate very little. She was aware of the man from the bar. He had taken a seat alone at a table near the wall, and he watched the room with an expression that revealed nothing. And she noticed that every guest who glanced his way immediately looked somewhere else. The specific behavior of people who recognize someone they do not want to draw attention from. She asked Nathan quietly who he was. Nathan's jaw went tight. He said, "A family obligation. Do not go near him tonight." She did not ask more. She had learned years ago not to push at Nathan's closed doors. At 8:43, her phone buzzed in her clutch. She ignored it. It buzzed again at 8:45. And again at 8:47. Under the edge of the tablecloth, she opened the message. It was from a number she did not recognize. A photograph. Nathan. A hotel room. A woman Nathan had introduced once as an old friend from law school. The timestamp said 3:42 p.m. today. Elara sat with it. She looked at it for less than 10 seconds. She put the phone back in her clutch. She picked up her water glass. She looked at the gardenias she had adjusted herself that afternoon. And she pressed her thumb against her grandmother's pearl earring and breathed through the thing rising in her chest, like water coming in under a door. She did not cry. She had not cried in public since she was 11 years old. But something was shifting in the room's architecture, some weight redistributing itself, and it had nothing to do with the photograph. It was Nathan. He had leaned across the table to say something to Diane, and the two of them were looking at Elara in the same moment, not with concern, not with love, but with the particular evaluating look of people checking on an asset they need to perform correctly. She understood in that moment, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that she was not a guest at this dinner. She was a component of it, a necessary piece of the presentation Nathan had constructed. And in the far corner of the room, Roman Viel had gone completely still. He had not looked away from her since she read the message. His expression had not changed, but something behind his eyes had shifted into something she could not name from across the room. Something that looked, from a distance, like a decision being made. Nathan stood for his toast. He had a voice built for rooms like this, warm and easy and confident. The voice of a man who has never once doubted whether he belonged anywhere. He thanked guests for traveling. He told the story of meeting Elara at the rooftop party in Midtown. He said she was different from anyone he had ever known. He said she kept his life running. He said she made everything around her beautiful. He said, "What would I do without you?" And he raised his glass in her direction. There was a version of that toast that was a love declaration. Elara heard it for what it was. He had toasted a function. He had toasted a service she provided. He had not once said he loved her. The room applauded, and Elara raised her glass and smiled and excused herself a moment later. She walked through the restaurant and out the side door to the terrace overlooking the East River. November air came off the water cold and clean. The Brooklyn Bridge hung above everything enormous and lit and indifferent. She stood at the railing and breathed. She heard the door open behind her. She did not turn. She had 30 seconds and she was going to use everyone. Footsteps on the stone, unhurried. Then a voice. He said, "You left your club soda inside." It was not Nathan's voice. She turned. Roman Viel was standing 4 feet away with his hands in his coat pockets and an expression that was careful and precise, and underneath all of that very old with a particular kind of grief. She looked at him. He said, "I am the family obligation, half-brother. Nathan and I do not speak often. She said, he told me not to come near you tonight. Roman said, that sounds like Nathan. A silence settled. Not uncomfortable. The rare kind that does not need filling. She said, why are you out here? He said, because you read something on your phone 40 minutes ago, and whatever it was changed the entire way you are holding yourself, and nobody in that room noticed except me. And I thought someone should notice. She felt something shift in her chest, some carefully arranged internal structure beginning to slide. She said, please do not be kind to me right now. I am managing something, and kindness makes it harder. He said, all right. And he simply stood beside her and looked at the river. They stood together in silence for 3 or 4 minutes, and the city moved and glowed below them, and the party continued inside without her. Then he said, the inside of your left wrist. She went very still. She said, it is old. He said nothing. His jaw tightened with the small, controlled movement of a man holding back something enormous. He said, I am sorry. Not for asking. I am sorry that the question has an answer. She pressed her thumb against her grandmother's earring. The old habit. The private anchor she had carried since she was 9 years old. She said, I should go back inside. He stepped aside. He did not reach for her. He did not crowd her. He made space, total and deliberate, in a way that felt like the most careful kind of respect she had ever been offered by anyone. She walked to the door. She paused without turning and said, thank you for the club soda. He said, you looked like you needed something that was just yours. She went back inside. Nathan met her at the entrance to the dining room. He smiled his easy working smile and said, there you are. I was starting to think you ran off. His hand went to her waist, and he steered her back toward the table, and she let him, and she thought about what Roman had said. Something that was just yours. She could not remember the last time Nathan had given her that. She could not remember the last time he had tried. Nathan stood again for a second toast. This one lighter, more informal. He joked about Elara being famously organized and notoriously quiet and impossible to surprise, because she had usually already planned the surprise before anyone else thought of it. The room laughed. It was warm and charming, and it was the specific warmth that makes a person smaller. That catalogs a person like a useful appliance. Reliable. Pleasant? Nothing more complicated than that. He raised his glass and said, what would I do without you? The room applauded. Elara looked at her plate. She pressed her thumb one last time against the pearl earring, and she stood up. The room did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way rooms go quiet when someone does something no one anticipated. A hush at the nearest tables, then a ripple outward, until 60 people were looking at the woman who until 30 seconds ago had been invisible. Elara said, I would like to say something. Her voice was steady. She had not planned for it to be steady. It simply was. Nathan laughed that warm, redirecting laugh and said, you do not have to do a speech tonight, babe. Save it for tomorrow. Elara looked at him. She said, I want to speak now. Nathan opened his mouth, and from somewhere behind her, in a voice that was not loud but carried the specific gravity of a thing that does not invite argument, someone said, let her speak. The room turned. Roman Vial had crossed the floor without anyone noticing him move. He stood behind Elara's empty chair, and he had not touched her, and he had not threatened anyone. He had simply appeared, and the quality of his stillness, the particular way every person in that room rearranged themselves around his presence, said everything that needed to be said. Nathan went pale. Diane set down her wine glass. Elara looked at the room. She looked at 60 faces. She looked at Nathan. She said, "I have spent 3 years making sure you were comfortable, your home beautiful, and your dinners organized, and your guests welcomed, and your life running without friction. I have been quiet and accommodating and easy to be around, and I have told myself that was love. I have told myself that being chosen for your convenience was the same as being chosen." She reached to the fourth finger of her left hand. She placed the engagement ring on the table. It caught the candlelight as it settled. She said, "I deserve to be loved out loud. I deserve someone who says my name when he toasts to the woman he loves. I deserve someone who looks at me when he is proud, not at the room. And I deserve not to receive a photograph of a hotel room on my own phone at my own rehearsal dinner." The silence was total. She looked at Nathan one last time. She said, "I wish everyone here a beautiful evening," and she walked to the door. Nobody moved. Not Nathan, not Diane, not one of the 60 guests. Nobody moved except Roman Vial, but not yet toward her. First he leaned down. He said something into Nathan's ear so quietly that not one other person in the room could hear it. Nathan went completely still. The color that had drained from his face did not return. Roman straightened and walked after her. Outside, the night was cold, and the river was dark, and Elara was standing on the sidewalk in her champagne silk dress with her arms around herself and nowhere to go. Her keys were at Nathan's apartment. Her dress for tomorrow was at Nathan's apartment. Mara was in Chicago. It was raining. Roman came through the door behind her. He stood beside her and looked at the rain and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "My car is at the curb. Jasper will take you wherever you need to go." She said, "I do not know where I need to go." He said, "Then Jasper will wait." A dark Mercedes was idling 20 feet away. A broad, quiet man in his 40s stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. Elara looked at the car. She looked at Roman. She said, "What did you say to him?" Roman said, "I told him I know about the arrangement he made with Cole Darden. And I told him that if he attempts to contact you or damage you or make your life smaller in any way, the next conversation we have will not be in a restaurant." She did not fully understand what that meant yet. She understood that it was absolute. She got in the car. Roman got in after her. Jasper drove north along the river, and the city passed in rivers of light, and Elara sat on her side of the back seat and looked at nothing and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Who is Cole Darden?" Roman was quiet for a moment. He said, "That is a longer conversation." He said, "And it involves your firm." He said, "Elara, you were already in danger before I walked into that restaurant tonight. Nathan did not bring you into something. You were already inside it." She felt the architecture of everything she thought she knew begin to shift. She said, "Tell me everything." And Roman Vial, who had spent 20 years telling no one anything, looked out at the passing city and said, "All right." His penthouse on the Upper West Side was not what she expected. She had imagined something cold, glass and performance and sharp edges arranged to announce power. But the apartment at the top of that building was quiet and dark and full of books. Real books with broken spines and turned pages and the particular disorder of a space where someone actually reads. A fireplace. Low, warm light. Windows that ran floor to ceiling and gave you the whole city without asking anything back. Jasper brought her a robe, and tea appeared on the kitchen counter without her asking, and she stood in the kitchen doorway looking at it and said, "Did you make tea?" Roman said, "Jasper made the tea." "I am not capable of making tea. That is the first thing you have said tonight that surprised me, she said. Something moved across his face, not a smile. The shadow of what a smile used to be before he spent too many years being the kind of man nobody is ever casual around. They sat on opposite ends of a long sofa with the fireplace between them and the city glowing 40 floors below. She said, "Tell me something true." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I have known about Nathan for 2 years, not about you. About the kind of man he became after our father died, and told him money was the same as worth. I came to that dinner because I needed to see for myself what he had made of the life he was given." She said, "And what did you see?" He said, "I saw a woman doing everything right in a room that did not deserve her." She looked into her tea. He said, "My mother was married to a man who diminished her. Not with violence, with indifference, with the specific cruelty of someone who knows exactly how much you need them and uses that knowledge as a lever. She was brilliant and funny, and she read every book in our house twice. She spent 30 years being invisible to the one person who was supposed to see her most." He looked at his glass. He said, "I was 15 when I understood what was happening. I was 22 when I had the power to change her situation. I was 23 when she died." Elara looked at him with the full weight of her attention. She said, "That is why you noticed me." He said, "Yes," she said. "Tell me about Cole Darden." His expression shifted. He said, "Cole was my right hand for 12 years. He understood my operations. He understood my code. And 8 months ago, I found out he had been moving money through legitimate businesses in my city without my knowledge, using my name as cover and using his access to my network to do it. When I closed his access, he did not accept it. He began looking for leverage. He said he found it 6 weeks ago when he connected Nathan's operation to your design firm. He said, the contracts passing through your firm have signatures, your signature. 3 of those contracts are dated on days when you were not in New York. He said, Cole had your signatures forged. He said, he told me if I did not restore his access and surrender 2 of my eastern distribution territories, he would give the entire file to federal prosecutors, and your name would be attached to every headline. A silence. She said, he was threatening you with me. Roman said, yes. She said, before you knew who I was. He said, yes. She said, and then you saw me at that dinner. He said, yes. She said, and now he knows you will not let anything happen to me. Roman looked at her directly. He said, yes, she said. That makes me more dangerous to you, not less. He said, I am aware of that. She said, and you are still here. He said, I am aware of that too. The city glowed below them. Outside, the February wind pushed against the glass. She pressed her thumb against her earring. One slow press. She said, I want to find the forged contracts myself. I keep records of everything, every project, every date, every site visit for 3 years. If those signatures are forged, I can prove it. He looked at her. He said, that would dismantle Cole's entire leverage structure. She said, I know. He said, you understand that if you do that, Cole will move. He will not wait, she said. I know. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression she had first seen on the terrace. That look that was not pity and was not admiration exactly, but something older. The recognition that passes between people who survived the same kind of quiet damage by different routes. He said, you should sleep. She said, I know. He stood. He said, the guest room has a lock. There are no conditions. Jasper is outside if you need anything. She said, I know. She paused. She said, Roman. He waited. She said, What you said earlier about your mother, about watching what happened to her. He waited. She said, I think you have been watching for her in every room you have entered for 20 years, and I think that is not a weakness. I think that is the best thing about you. He was very still for a moment. Then he said, Good night, Elara. She went to the guest room. On the kitchen counter in the morning there was coffee and a Kindle and a folded note that said, There is no obligation and there is no expectation. Stay as long as you need. And at the bottom, in smaller, careful letters, it said, You are not invisible. You never were. She found it in 4 hours. 3 of the key contracts in Cole's file bore her signature on dates when her own meticulous records proved she was physically somewhere else. A project site in Philadelphia, a client walkthrough in Boston, a supplier meeting in Newark. She had photographs from each location. She had emails with timestamps. She had hotel receipts. She had the particular documentation of a person who was, as Nathan had once joked in front of 60 guests, notoriously organized. Cole Darden had built his leverage structure on forged signatures, and he had built it on the assumption that Elara Donovan was the kind of woman who did not keep careful track of herself. He had looked at her file and seen a target. He had not looked closely enough. She brought everything to Roman's desk and laid it out. He looked at the documents. He looked at her. He said, How long did this take you? She said, 4 hours. He said, Cole has been constructing this for 14 months. She said, He built it without ever looking at me directly. He only looked at what he needed me to be. Roman looked at her for a long moment. He said, You know what this means. She said, It means his leverage is gone. He said, It means he has nothing. And a man like Cole, when he understands he has nothing, does not negotiate. He escalates. As if the universe had been listening, her phone rang. An unknown number. She answered. A man's voice, very calm, said, Miss Donovan, your friend Mara Delvin lives on Winthrop Avenue in Chicago. She walks her dog every morning at 7. We thought you should know that we know that. The line went dead. The room was very quiet. Roman was already standing. He already had his phone out. He said, When did that call come in? She said, Just now. 30 seconds ago. He said into his phone, Jasper, Winthrop Avenue, Chicago, Mara Delvin. Right now. He looked at her. He said, Cole made the call because it was the only move he had left. If Mara were already taken, the call would not have come. The call was meant to isolate you, to send you running before you finished what you started. She said, I am not running. He said, I know. She said, But I want to be clear about something. She said, I understand what I am staying inside of. I understand that your world is dangerous, and that being near you has consequences, and that this is not simple, and I am not asking you to pretend otherwise. He said, Elara. She said, I stayed in Nathan's life for 3 years, because staying felt safer than leaving. That is what fear staying looks like. This is not that. She looked at him. She said, I am staying because I want to. That is a different thing entirely. Roman looked at her the way the river looks at a light that falls on it, still and deep and quietly changed by it. He said, We move tonight. She said, Together. He said, Together. They moved that same night, and they moved with the kind of precision that only comes when the right people have the right information and are no longer willing to wait. Roman brought his documentation on Nathan's operation, together with Elara's proof of the forged signatures and the records she had kept, with the discipline of a woman who always knew, somewhere deep and unspoken, that she might one day need to prove her own existence to the world. Roman's legal team submitted the full file to the federal prosecutors who had been building a case against Nathan's real estate operation for 11 months without enough to close it. The forged signatures fractured the entire structure. Nathan's attorneys attempted to negotiate. There was nothing left to negotiate with. Nathan Holloway was arrested on a Wednesday morning outside his apartment on Park Avenue. Elara heard about it from Mara, who had been kept safe by Jasper for 3 days in Chicago, and who called her screaming with a specific joy that only close friends experience on behalf of each other. A screaming that went on for the better part of 2 minutes before either of them could form a complete sentence. Cole Darden did not go to prison. That was Roman's decision, and when Elara asked about it, he said, "Prison for a man like Cole creates successors. It creates mythology. It turns a failure into a martyr story that someone else will carry forward." He said, "What Cole has now is something more complete than a sentence. He has nothing. His name in every room that matters is finished. His alliances are gone. His accounts are inaccessible through entirely legal mechanisms his own former attorneys helped construct. He is alive. He will remain alive. And he will spend the rest of his days in a world where everyone who matters knows exactly what he tried to do and exactly how it fell apart. For a man who built his entire identity on being necessary and feared, that is an erasure no prison term can match." Elara thought about that. She thought it was the most precise form of justice she had ever heard of, and she thought it said something true about Roman Vial that he had chosen it. The final piece arrived 10 days later. The Holloway Foundation annual autumn gala was still on the calendar. Nobody had canceled it. Elara asked Roman if he was going. He said, "I was not planning to." She said, "I want to go." He looked at her. She said, "Nathan will not be there, but Diane will. And every person who was at that rehearsal dinner will be there. And I want to walk into that room. Not to make a scene, not to say anything loud. I just want to walk in and let them see me and let them understand that I did not disappear." He said, "You know what it means when you walk in with me." She said, "I know exactly what it means." She wore the navy dress she had bought for a client presentation before any of this began. She wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. She wore the expression she had been practicing her entire life, calm and unhurried and decided, except that tonight, for the first time, it was not a performance. It was simply her face. They walked into the Plaza Hotel on Fifth Avenue, and the room went quiet with the particular silence of Roman Vial's presence, and then went quiet again in a different register, as people recognized who was beside him. Diane Holloway saw her from across the room, and for one long moment the mask Diane had worn for decades did not quite hold. Elara crossed the room to her. She said, "I want you to know that I bear you no ill will. I understand the world you come from and the choices you made inside it. And I want you to know that I am going to be very well." Diane looked at her. Something moved through the older woman's face that had been sealed behind composure for so long, it had almost forgotten how to move. It looked like regret. It looked like recognition. Diane said, "I know." And she turned and walked away, and Elara let her go, cleanly, without anger, the way you release something you carried for longer than it deserved. 3 months later, on a cold, bright morning in February, Elara Donovan opened the door to her own studio for the first time. Her name was on the lease. Her name was on the business license. Her drawings were on the walls, and her fabric samples were spread across the long work table, and her grandmother's pearl earrings were in her ears, and her first independent client was coming in 40 minutes. She had coffee from the corner shop and a legal pad, and the specific feeling of someone who has arrived somewhere they built with their own hands. At 9:15, the door opened. She expected her client. It was Roman. He was in his dark coat, and he was holding a single white gardenia, and this was so completely unlike anything she would have predicted from him that she laughed out loud before she could stop herself. He looked at the gardenia and then at her and said, "Jasper suggested it. I had reservations." She said, "It is perfect. It is also completely unlike you." He said, "I am making adjustments." He set the gardenia on her drafting table and looked around the studio, at her drawings, at the fabric samples, at her name on the frosted glass of the front door. He said, "This is you." She said, "Yes." He said, "It looks exactly like you." She said, "That is the idea." He looked at her then with the full and unguarded attention he had only ever offered her in careful increments, as though he were rationing something he did not fully trust himself to give. He said, "I am not a simple man to be near. I want you to know that I know that. My world is not simple and not always clean, and there will be difficult nights, and I cannot give you the kind of promises ordinary men offer because I learned a long time ago that promises made from certainty are worth less than decisions made from knowledge." He said, "What I can tell you is that I have made a decision, and the decision is that you are the first person I have known in 20 years who makes me want to be in the room. Not managing the room, not watching the room, just in it, present, with you." Elara looked at him. She said, "That is not a romantic speech." He said, "No, it is not," she said. "It is better than a romantic speech." She crossed the room and she took his hand. She said, "I am not the woman I was 4 months ago. I do not intend to fold myself into convenient shapes for anyone, not even for you. If I am in your world, I am in it as exactly who I am." He said, "I would not have you any other way." She said, "Then we understand each other." He said, "We understand each other." Outside, the city moved in its infinite, unpausing way, and the light came through the tall studio windows and fell across her drawings and her fabric samples and the single white gardenia on the drafting table. And this is where the story lives. Not in the dinner that destroyed one life and began another. Not in the ring placed on a white tablecloth. Not in a voice from the back of a quiet room saying, "Let her speak." The story lives in what came after all of that. In a woman standing in a space that had her name on the door. In the decision, made alone, in the rain, on a sidewalk outside a beautiful restaurant, to stop enduring and start choosing. And this is the lesson. Dignity is not a gift. It is not something a man hands you or a ring confirms or a title grants. Dignity is reclaimed. Quietly, deliberately. Often in a moment no one else witnesses. When you decide, in whatever room you are sitting in right now, that the story you have been telling yourself about what you deserve is no longer one you are willing to keep telling. Sometimes the person who helps you remember your own worth is a patient friend. Sometimes it is years of slow and private work. And sometimes, in the stories we tell each other in the dark, it is a man in a black coat at a corner of a bar who orders you something cold because you look like you need something that belongs only to you, and who sees you clearly before you have spoken a single word, and who spends everything that comes after making sure the world sees you too. But the lesson is not the man. The lesson is the woman who decided she was worth seeing. She walked out of the room, she took herself back. She never apologized for it. Choose the people who see you before you speak. Trust the ones who make room for your silence. And never, not for any reason, mistake endurance for love. This has been the story of Elara Donovan. Thank you for being here with us tonight. If something in this story stayed with you, if there was a moment that felt true to something you have lived or something you are living right now, please hit that like button and leave us a comment. Tell us what landed for you. We read every single one. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications, because every week we bring you a new story of women reclaiming their dignity, of men learning what it truly means to protect someone, and of love that is earned rather than assumed. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, someone who is still sitting at a table where they are not being seen, share this with them. Because sometimes the most important thing you can give another person is a story that tells them they are allowed to stand up and walk out the door. We will see you in the next story. And so the story closes. Hey, if you are still here with us right now, I want you to know that means something. Because nobody stays through a 60-minute story unless something in it is touching them. So whatever it was, the moment she placed the ring down, the moment Roman said, "Let her speak," the moment she walked into her own studio with her name on the door, something in this story found you. And I do not think that is an accident. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And that is exactly what Elara did. She could not change Nathan. She could not undo 3 years, but she changed the story she was telling herself. And that one decision changed everything else. Here is what I want to leave you with. You are not too late. You are not too broken. And you are absolutely not invisible, even if someone in your life has made you feel that way for a very long time. If this story gave you something today, please hit that like button right now. Leave us a comment telling us which moment hit you hardest, and share this with one person who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you never miss the next story. We will be here, and so will you. This story is a work of fiction created purely for entertainment and emotional storytelling purposes. All characters, including Elara Donovan, Roman Vielle, Nathan Holloway, Cole Darden, and all other individuals appearing in this narrative, are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or to actual events, organizations, or locations, is purely coincidental and unintentional. The Vielle Syndicate and all related organizations depicted in this story do not exist and are invented solely to serve the narrative. This content is a cinematic audio drama in the tradition of fictional romance storytelling and is not presented as a true story, a documentary account, or a factual representation of real events. The themes explored, including emotional healing, self-worth, and personal empowerment, are universal human experiences reflected through a fictional lens. Our channel is dedicated to original creative fiction designed to entertain, inspire, and provide a meaningful listening experience. Thank you for understanding and for being part of our storytelling community.